Recently I talked about the Thames Tunnel from Rotherhithe to Wapping, one of the great engineering achievements of 19th century London, but also a massive commercial failure. I didn't want to end things on a negative note, so today we're going to talk about the East London line and how the tunnel redeemed itself. The East London line started out as the East London Railway. This was formed in 1865 with the specific intent of buying out the Thames Tunnel and building a railway through it to link the lines north and south of the river. There was an awful lot of interest in this as the only railway crossing in East London running through the heart of the docks. The potential was enormous. Naturally, plenty of railway companies wanted in on it. The basic idea was that the line would connect with the Great Eastern Railway and the Metropolitan Railway at Liverpool Street, the London, Brighton and South Coast and the South London Railway at what is now New Cross Gate, and the South Eastern Railway at New Cross. There would be another spur to Old Kent Road, which is a now closed station, which I don't have any footage of. The South London Railway would also allow the London, Chatham and Dover Railway to access the line, and the Metropolitan Railway would connect the Great Northern Railway, the Great Western Railway and the Midland Railway to the new venture. If you aren't familiar with the ins and outs of these companies, it doesn't particularly matter, but suffice it to say that between them they covered a pretty sizable chunk of England. In 1865, the East London Railway Company was incorporated and bought the old Thames Tunnel for £200,000. It was still used as a foot tunnel while the line was being constructed south of the river. The first section of line opened in 1869 between Wapping, which was then known as Wapping and Chadwell, and New Cross. Confusingly at that time, New Cross Gate was also called New Cross. This mess wouldn't be sorted out until 1923, when both were taken over by the Southern Railway. North of the river things were a little slower. The railway had to go through the docks, and the docks owners were exacting about what they would allow. The railway had to run under the docks without disturbing anything above, which required the use of heavy underpinning and cofferdams. The process was not only slow but expensive, and this would impact the company heavily later on. The section up to Liverpool Street would open in 1876 with a ceremonial train to Brighton over the new line. The East London Railway owned no trains of its own, and services were operated by the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. They made use of a type of locomotive officially called the A1s, but due to their small size and their new habit of diving underground, they have become eternally known as the Terriers. Incidentally, there are some very visible signs of the steam era both north and south of the river. These smoke vents. In 1878, the financial difficulties the line had had so far were beginning to bite, and a new chairman was appointed, Edward Watkin. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you'll know that Watkin was also chairman of the Metropolitan Railway. His plan was to build a better link between the Metropolitan and East London Railways, both physically and in business terms. In 1884, the St Mary's Curve opened, which joined the two railways at Whitechapel. 1882 had seen the formation of the East London Railway Joint Committee, which was a consortium of 5 companies to rescue and operate the line. The Metropolitan, the South Eastern, the London, Brighton and South Coast, the District and the London, Chatham and Dover. 2 of the companies, the Metropolitan and the South Eastern, were headed by Watkin. Interestingly, the London, Chatham and Dover and the District were headed by Watkin's arch-enemy, James Stats Forbes. Finally, in 1885, a 6th company joined, the Great Eastern Railway. In 1913, the Metropolitan Railway took over passenger services on the line, making it a de facto part of the Underground. The line was electrified, but only between the New Crosses and Shoreditch. Passenger services to Liverpool Street would cease, and the little-used spur to Old Kent Road would close. In fact, it appeared that the East London line wasn't exactly the licence to print money its promoters had hoped. It always struggled financially and suffered from a shortage of passengers. In 1939, the St Mary's Curve closed, effectively isolating it from the rest of the Underground. The decline of the Docklands also hit the line hard. In 1966, the connection to the main line at New Cross was removed, and in 1975, so was the connection at New Cross Gate. The East London line was on its own. Far from an essential link across East London, it had become an isolated oddity on the tube map. It was nominally part of the Metropolitan line, but very much the poor relation. running a fairly minimal service using whatever rolling stock the rest of the Underground could spare. In 1980 it formally became a separate line on the tube, and in 1990 it turned orange on the map. During this time, consideration was also being given to a project known as the East London Line Extension. In other words, having cut the line off from the rest of the network because there was no traffic, they now wanted to reattach it to the rest of the network to bring in more traffic. The scheme went through various permutations before the powers that be finally settled on the concept that would become known as the London Overground. The East London Line would no longer be part of the Underground, and in 2006 it closed. Shoreditch was abandoned altogether in favour of a new extension north towards Highbury and Islington. A new flyover was built at New Cross Gate and thus a connection towards West Croydon. In 2012 it became possible to use the East London Line to travel between Highbury and Islington and Clapham Junction. And so it has remained ever since, an essential link in the London Overground network. For so long, it's been a bit of a failure. The tunnel failed, the railway failed, the Underground line kind of failed. But it seems like, having been given a little love, it's finally the line it was meant to be. Hello all, I hope you enjoyed this Cockney tale from the tube. If you did, then do hit the like button and subscribe and hit the bell icon if you are so inclined. As always, I'd like to thank my supporters on Ko-fi and Patreon for being the terriers to my commuter service. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.